So this is a first for me doing a live presentation to the webcam there. So I'm going to try and look at the camera and not look around me, and hopefully it'll all go pretty well. I did search Google for some advice about this and what I should do to make sure that this went well for me today. And one suggestion was to put photos of all the people who might be listening kind of behind my laptop screen, so I can imagine you all listening as I'm talking. I didn't do that, so don't worry, there isn't this strange gallery of rogues behind the laptop. But I did also receive some very sensible advice from Hannah, who is watching today. Hello, Hannah, who said it's going to be just like teaching, but without anyone to interrupt you. Obviously, in my classes, no one would interrupt anyway, but I don't think it's quite the same because I can't see you all. So do feel free to send some questions along to the chat, and maybe that will make it a bit more of a kind of normal experience for us all. So today we're going to be speaking about some journeys, and before I do that, I will tell you a little bit about why I've been to Travel Talks 3 times already. It's not going to be a repeat of those, so don't worry if you have been to those, and why Trish has invited me to do this first presentation for Travel Talks today. My name is Debs Butler, Trish has said that, and I am not a professional adventurer, but my biggest claim to fame is that Jason Fox, who's now super famous, isn't he? He's on one of those TV shows. Jason Fox, before he rowed across the Atlantic with Team Essence in 2016, did ask me if I was a professional adventurer as I arrived at the port on my bicycle in Portugal. And that is my top claim to fame, I think. I'm not sponsored by any kit companies or anything, so if you see me use kits, because I like it and I think it's good, and I am not very good at cycling at all. I'm definitely not very good at cycling. I do have a normal job. I'm a teacher. Mostly that's normal. I've got a house. I'm a normal person. And I just save up money for my trip. No one pays me to do them. Very rarely does anyone really think that they're interesting at all. So it's very good to be here and talk about this one. Usually when I visit Travel Talks, I talk about one journey in particular, and I would show lots of photos like this. So down there in the bottom left-hand corner is a tiny little Debs cycling through the mountains in Japan. And I've been lucky because on my bike I've seen some wonderful sights, some absolutely beautiful scenery. There's a tiny Debs on this one as well, some wonderful wildlife, and also some very strange things that I never thought I would see. That is a ladies' toilet in Albania. I can't explain it either. I don't know why there would not be cubicles. Today we're going to be talking about something slightly different, but I will tell you how I ended up doing those big journeys, and that was this one gateway bike tour. So people talk about, you know, gateways into things, usually bad things actually, but my gateway into bike touring was a 10-day trip around Normandy in 2010. At this point, I'd just got my first road bike. I wasn't very good at cycling at all, wasn't very confident with it, but Joe persuaded me that we should go to France, camp, take our bikes and drink wine and eat cheese. And so for 10 days we did that, and I was just so entranced by the fact that there was a line on a map that we had travelled ourselves. We joined the dots on the map just with person power. So that in turn led to some other bike tours, and they got increasingly more difficult until eventually in 2015 we set out on this big round the world trip, which if you've been to Travel Talks before, you may well have heard me talk about that trip. We just set off from the front door of my mum's house, and what's great today is because it's virtual, my mum can be here. She wouldn't normally be in Leicester, so hi Mum and Paul. And we rode almost 20,000 miles around the world. But I think really all of the journeys that we've done are just as important because they were all kind of steps to make that one happen. And then since then, we've done some more different things. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So one short bike journey, because there's a lot of cycling fans here in Leicester, one paddle boarding journey, so that's quite a different way to make a journey, and one journey by foot. Now, one reason that all of these are particularly pertinent right now is that if we try to look at the advantages of the situation we find ourselves in, particularly a lot of people in cities have reported that the air quality is much, much better because there is less traffic and there's a lot less flights going on. So in terms of air pollution, we're in a really much better position than perhaps we were even a month ago. Now, I'm really a big fan of active travel. I ride to work. In fact, sometimes I scoot to work. I go on the train, take my scooter, and then I scoot to work at the other end or run. I really think it's important that we use our cars as little as possible and we fly as little as possible. And in fact, we haven't flown now for over 3 years, and it doesn't really seem to be on the horizon right now. So all of these trips are people power or public transport to get to the start and end. So hopefully that will be of interest given the particular situation. So I'm just going to stop sharing this particular part of screen share and show you some photos now, which I know is a really important part of Travel Talks for everybody. So the first trip that I'm going to talk to you about today, and hopefully again you should have a photo overlaid with my face. Let me just check that one. Is a bike trip that we did in 2013. So we cycled across Canada the previous summer, and we were thinking, oh yeah, we're quite good at this. We're quite good at this cycling now. Can I just check you can see the photos and still hear the talk? A thumbs up, bit of a wave. Yeah, thanks. Lovely job. If I full screen the photos, are we still good? Can't tell. No. Okay. All right. Yep.
No.
So no change. You can still see everything.
Yeah. All good.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks. I've lost my
better with the full screen.
Yeah. Yesterday when I tried this, I had the Zoom box still on the top of this. For some reason today I don't have that, so I wasn't sure. All right, so getting ready for a trip, and getting ready for a trip for a week or a month or a year or 2 years on a bike is pretty much the same. That is pretty much all the stuff you need. Jo loves to do these photos where she puts out all the kit. It was the first time we'd really done any cycling in Europe since that France trip, so a few years later. But we thought we were going to be all right because we'd ridden a really long way across Canada, so we had all these great plans. We're going to leave Leicester, we're going to get the train to Harwich, and we are going to cycle to Switzerland and across Switzerland in 4 weeks in the school summer holidays. Some of you might, with good European geography, already be thinking that sounds like it's quite far. It was quite far, so we did have to reassess. But we'll just get on with some photos straight away now. We got there with the overnight ferry from Harwich to Holland, which is one of my favourite ways to travel, because instantly, if you ignore the pannier explosion in the room there, you feel like you're in an Agatha Christie novel and anything could happen. That is a super exciting way to start your trip. And even better, you get off the ferry with your bike straight onto beautiful Dutch cycle paths. You don't really need to be able to navigate. And even better, the little village there, Hoek van Holland, there's about to be a couple of supermarkets open. So you can start your day with some lovely pastries or some Dutch apple cake as you fancy. And I think people have talked about cycling in the Netherlands before for Travel Talks, and it is just like you expect it's going to be. Wonderful cycle paths, loads of people out on bikes, hardly anyone's wearing lycra and helmets. We looked really odd in that respect. And people are just using their bikes for their day-to-day business. And of course, there's plenty of windmills and other such Dutch things to see. So the first few days were brilliant. We didn't have a map at this point. We were just using the Dutch cycling signs to navigate by. And that's really, really perfectly possible. You don't need a map in the Netherlands. So you saw one border earlier. This is another one. This is the Netherlands to German border on a bike path. It's not very well staffed right there, but maybe it will be when we need to show us a bit more often. One question we get asked a lot is, how do you decide where to go? So we decided we were going to cycle from Hoek of Holland to Switzerland, and then we had actually got a route across Switzerland, because in Switzerland they have a really good network of national cycle routes that allow you to cross the country in different directions. But obviously there's quite a big space, and I didn't know whether I could share any maps with you because of copyright and stuff if it's being recorded. So if you have a look on a map later, there is quite a big space between Hoek van Holland and the northeast corner of Switzerland we were aiming for. So it's quite tricky in Europe to choose a route. It's very easy when you're cycling somewhere like North America, or you're cycling in Asia, because there's probably only one road to go where you want to go. So you get on it, you stay on it for several days in the case of cycling across Kansas, and you don't really need to make any other decisions. In Europe, there's just so many paths you could take on the road. You've got the bike path, this bike path, that bike path. So what we had done was kind of plug into the route some definite stopping points. And for me, this was a really interesting ride, because we actually went to the village where my family and I had lived, but as too young for me to remember, in Germany. So we picked out just a few stopping points like this. So that's my mum. I don't know if she's seen those pictures. That's me on our old street. And we also picked out a off-road bike route that had recently opened called the Venbahn. Now this I would fully recommend. I think we picked it up somewhere near Aachen in Germany, or maybe a bit further north, and it went through to the north of Luxembourg, and it was brilliant. Really easy grades, loads of these little shelters, and all virtually off-road. So that was a really good kind of 2 easy points to join up. We also really had in mind that we'd visit Luxembourg because it's so small and it looks like it's always got amazing castles, and it totally does have that. It's got everything it says on the tin, and you can see in a few towns we made a few friends along the way. So here we are in beautiful Luxembourg, and we have actually subsequently cycled through Luxembourg on another trip, and I really would recommend which playing at the border there. And if you do get the chance to visit this town, I'm just sitting in the market square in a town called Echternach. Now, I visited Echternach twice, so 2 times, and on 2 occasions out of 2, in Echternach, there has been some kind of barbecued meat and pressed apple festival in the square. So my only possible conclusion here is that if you go to Echternach on a Saturday morning, that's what you get. The first one was something to do with firefighters. The second one was something to do with scouts. Basically, you get a big load of meat in bread for not very many euros, and there's loads of people around, even though it's not great weather. And we had a really great time. So Echternach is the party town of Luxembourg. After that, we went through the Black Forest in Germany, which is really pretty also, and found the Rhine, and eventually made it to where we were aiming for kind of the whole time, which was that northeast corner of Switzerland. And you can see that the village name told us what was about to happen to the cycling, and it definitely did get much harder. In Switzerland, there is no kind of idea of gentle grades or switchbacks, and we came to dread these sort of tiny brown signs that would tell us what the bike route was about to do. So it was a really well signed bike route, very easy to navigate, would definitely recommend. And every so often we were following bike route 4, which was Alpine Panorama. There would be a small sign at the side of the road telling us that we were going perhaps on a smaller road or on some kind of sort of slightly rougher trail. And if it was brown, it would be because it was a hill, and it would say something like gain of 250 meters in 3 kilometers, so almost a 10% grade. It would be something like that, and there were just so many steep hills. So this was 18% there for a stretch. Really, really tough riding. So very high effort, but very, very high reward cycling, just absolutely beautiful. And again, we were kind of putting in some stops that we really wanted to see. So I'm a really big Sherlock Holmes fan. I love the books. So we were always going to stop in Meiringen and make friends with Sherlock. And also some of those kind of big touristy areas around Grindelwald and the Alps there in Switzerland were really, really beautiful. I'm not too sure what they thought was going to happen to that cyclist, but it doesn't look like it's going well. And at the bottom of the screen there, you can see the brown sign that I mentioned. Just underneath there, there'll be a nice little telling you how much up you're going to do in the next few K. So we also took some time off the bikes, not very many days on that trip because we were squeezing it into my school summer holidays. It's 4 weeks. And at the moment on this day off cycling, I am triumphant. Look at me, I've got some croissants, I've got some apple juice, and I'm going up a mountain in a cable car. And we planned a fantastic walking route. We're going to do an ascent on the cable car, so, gain quite a bit of height on that. I think it was about 1,000 meters. Then we were going to do another few, 600-700 meters of ascent up to the top of a peak, beautiful, and then trot back down, maybe via the cable car or just back down into the village. And it all started very well. Beautiful, beautiful scenery, having a great time, lovely, 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 wonderful views. And it was about this point when we thought, we're having a great time today. The walk is going so, so well. Let's not get the cable car back down. Let's definitely walk all the way back down to Grindelwald. So I think I've mentioned the Swiss gradients, the love of the gradient. Most things were 10% minimum. It was pretty much a 10% grade walk all the way back down to town. And the next day, we could not move. Absolutely could not move our legs, could not do anything. There was no chance of getting on a bike. So the triumphant croissant apple juice feeling did not last all day. We did eventually get back on the bikes and descend down out of the Alps into kind of a beautiful lakes area. Really, really wonderful cycling and great camp spots. So I'm just chopping my carrots for dinner there on the side of Lake Geneva. So really, really stunning scenery. And it was at that point we'd kind of loosely worked out our route home, and we'd booked some trains a bit earlier in the journey. And it was kind of around this point that we started to feel like we were on a bit more of a holiday. So on our route home on the train, we made sure we had a couple of hours in Paris to cycle around the sites before we eventually made it back home to Leicester. So it was pretty easy to organise that one, a train out from Leicester, ferry, ride through Europe, and then the train back via Paris. I will be talking about that train back from Geneva in a bit more detail if you are a cycling fan and you are part of the virtual cycle touring festival on the 25th, 26th of April. Because there were some kind of nuances with taking a train on the TGV that made it a little bit more tricky than we thought that the experience was going to be. But we didn't plan that trip home until we were part of the way through the trip, so we don't really book ahead stuff. But this was really, really easy to do, really, really easy to organise. And if you don't fancy the mountains of Switzerland, you could definitely pop your bike on a ferry and have a great time just riding around the Netherlands. And the northwest of Germany also has amazing bike routes, as does the part of Belgium that joins on to the Netherlands. So you could do a really, really good tour, lots of great food, cakes. I think you saw a couple of cakes in the pictures there, very, very easily. So that was a really, really fun tour. It was definitely a great way to fill 4 weeks. It's probably the only time I would say I've definitely achieved muscle gain on my legs in a month period. Those hills of Switzerland were just pretty brutal in the end. And you can skip the boring bits. We got to an area just after Luxembourg City where we had no plans really to ride through the area. We just really wanted to get to the Black Forest and get into the more pretty scenery. And we just hopped on a train for 2 hours. You know, this wasn't a ride where there was, oh, we definitely want to ride the whole thing. We had some places we wanted to ride to. And we also had some places where we weren't that bothered about the riding. It was a holiday. So there's no rules to this. You don't have to make it really punishing. You don't have to ride really far every day. Campsites are so well spaced in Europe. You could just ride, 15, 20 miles and have a really great time. So that was really, really enjoyable. So I'm just going to skip on now back to remind you where we're going next, which is our sub trip. And this one is really a different thing. Just seeing some questions there. Sorry, because I'm back on the Zoom screen. Couple of questions. How much the ride was off-road? That's a great question, Susan. I would say probably the Vennbahn, definitely. Everything in the Netherlands, most of Luxembourg. In Switzerland, it was about probably 70% road, 30% trail. But if you use the actual Swiss national cycle routes, then they're all low traffic roads. So I wouldn't have said in Switzerland we were ever on a road that felt too busy. So that was really, really good riding. And there were other bike routes we could have used to join things up. So we could have ridden down the Rhine route for much longer and been off the road. Sometimes we find with bike routes, it's not fast enough going. There's too much stopping, too much slowness, other people on the bike route. So sometimes for quicker miles, we're not very quick, but we might go onto the road a little bit. So that's a great question. The name of the off-road cycle route was the Vennbahn. So thanks for the bike questions there, Vennbahn. So just then looking at the sub-trip, this was something that was kind of completely new for us. When we were in the US and Canada in 2016, we started to see lots of people on stand-up paddleboards. I'll show you a picture in a moment for those people who aren't too sure what I'm talking about. We started to see lots of people on stand-up paddleboards, and we thought, well, that would be a cool way to do a journey. So at this point, we'd never been on one. And then we were on a paddleboard. Somebody let us have a go on one in the Grand Tetons in the US, and we just fell off. Didn't dampen our enthusiasm though. And we had another little go in Canada and got a little bit better. So we'd had this one kind of paddleboarding experience where it went really well. And then I went on a hen party when I was back in the UK in about 2018, which is where all good travel stories start, I'm sure. And one of the activities on the hen party was to go paddleboarding. So off we went paddleboarding, and it was here that I really learned what was going to help us for a long time with paddleboarding, which is completely counterintuitively, to stand up smoothly, you need to be going fast. So you get on your knees, you paddle really fast, and then you stand up. And that is much easier than trying to stand up on a still paddleboard. So once I'd learned this, I decided there was no stopping me. So we went to Rutland Water, hired some for an hour so Joe could have a go, and just bit the bullet, bought some paddleboards, checked out which ones came with big bags and which ones were quite robust, had them sent to the house, and started to plan a paddleboarding journey. So we were living in Narborough at the time, so just outside Leicester for Leicester locals, and we thought, what is the easiest way we can have a paddleboarding adventure? And we started to look at some river routes and things like that. We got some OS maps out of the library, the waterproof ones, and we started our SUP tour. And some of you will recognise this, it's in Ayleston. So we just got a taxi from our house with these bags of stuff and the paddleboards. And the Packhorse Bridge, Leicester locals, is just to the right of the photo. So somewhere you've probably been if you've walked along the canal there. Certainly that old bridge is well worth a visit if you haven't been down there, Leicester locals. That Ayleston Packhorse Bridge is just incredible, really beautiful medieval bridge. And the only downside really of paddleboarding is the process that you can see me in the photo doing right now, which is pumping them up. It takes about, I would say, 8 to 10 minutes of quite vigorous squatting per board to get them pumped up. And I'll just show you that we've got the baggage there on the front. So everything we need for the trip is on the front of the boards there in those dry bags. We've got some tent, sorry, not a tent, we've got some bivvies, sleeping bags, a small camp stove, some snacks, spare clothes, that kind of thing. And it's actually quite mild that morning, so it was a pretty good start. And this is August Bank Holiday 2018, so it wasn't great weather. People remember that one, so it was all right. So we got going, and it wasn't always pretty, but we did start to see some Leicester landmarks. And you can see here the kind of process of lock portaging, which is get all the baggage off, get all the boards out, walk around the lock, and put them all back in again. And that was quite a feature of that journey through Leicester. And again, if you're local and you walk along the towpath or you ride along there, you will think there's actually quite a lot of locks in Leicester, and some of them were quite tricky. So this was a pretty big undertaking for us. So we anticipated quite a few of these difficulties. I'm not sure we really thought about how tiring the portaging of the locks would be, particularly because if you think about some of the ones going through Frog Island, again, Leicester locals, the gap between the water and the land is really quite large. So some of them we were sort of having to put our arms on a sill there and then drag ourselves up and then lay down and reach down for the bags. It was pretty tiring that day. But it was just a really great way to see the city. And if you haven't walked the towpath, I would fully recommend that you do that, because it's just so lovely and you see parts of the city that you know really well from a completely different viewpoint. So really, really enjoyed that. And it really did help going through somewhere familiar. You can see that we didn't kind of undertake this one lightly. This was quite out of our comfort zone, really. We'd done a few days canoe trip in New Zealand with our stuff in dry barrels a few years ago, but other than that, no paddling journeys. We're not paddlers, either of us. So we had buoyancy aids to keep ourselves safe. We went through some kind of the safety things to do with what we would do if somebody fell in and all that kind of stuff. So we did have to think about this one a bit more carefully probably than some of the other trips, and certainly some of the bike trips, which by this point we're feeling much more confident with. So we're looking probably not that comfortable on the boards on the first day. And we were really pleased to get to the end of it, and very handily. And this is where I think adventuring locally and not worrying about going off anywhere too far is great. We actually stayed the first night with one of my friends whose house backs onto the river in Barrow-on-Soar. So we've got quite a decent distance there, south of Leicester in Ayleston to Barrow-on-Soar, but it was really low risk. You know, if we'd really struggled with the distance, we could have probably got out earlier and got her to pick us up. There were probably some other get outs where we could then have walked. I mean, the stuff's quite heavy, but we might have managed it. So it was pretty low risk as adventures go. The next day, we set off going north from Barrow-on-Soar, so we're heading through Loughborough, which is where both of us studied. So again, that was really fun to go through the town, see it from a completely different angle. And already we were starting to feel quite a bit more confident on the boards. There's not super loads of stops when you're on the river, so as soon as you see one, this is Normanton Sailing Club, we're straight off the board in for a tea and a cake, homemade cakes. It was very good. And it feels really kind of like Famous Five adventure-y when you're on the river, because you are quite separate from any kind of development. Your choices of where you stop are really limited to kind of what's on the river. So you just, as soon as you see somewhere, you take it to pub, cafe, whatever it is. Mostly marinas it was on this trip. And it just feels really kind of, I don't know, basic and fun. It feels really like going into the unknown. You can feel very far away from civilization, not very many miles away from a town. So it was really good, and we started to really enjoy ourselves on that second day. Got a bit more confident, a bit less wobbly. a little bit quicker probably. Did have some quite bad headwinds that day, but overall it was pretty good. And we camped that night at a marina, and they did us a really massive chip butty and chips for dinner, and that was a total win as well. So it was going pretty well, and it wasn't always pretty, but there was always things to look at. It didn't really ever get boring, and I really enjoyed that element of it too. So we get there on day 3. This is the start of day 3, and we have just reached the junction of the Soar and the Trent. So we've gone from what's really on the Soar, we were on the navigation of the Soar, so it not really any flow, quite a lot of locks, and really kind of easy to maneuver, onto the Trent, which is at this point a really kind of proper river. If you can think about where Trent Junction is, that is a real proper river. So starting maybe to get to a little bit more of a risky part of the journey, and I'm going to say now, before we go into our break, that later on this day there was 2 incidences. One was not so good, and one was really good. So 2 experiences about to come here on the River Trent, and I think we're just kind of approaching the point. We've got a few more minutes where we might need to take a break. So let's stick with the journey then, as we are. So we're on the edge of Nottingham here, just kind of west of Beeston. And the great thing about doing all the exercise, and you've seen from the name Breaks and Cakes, is that you can pretty much eat whatever you like on the way. So there's a bit of a whopping breakfast going on here, and it's a really good job there was, because just after we went right at this junction, we had a small incident at lock. So I think I explained that sometimes the gap between the bank height and the water height is really high at locks. So it can be quite tricky to maneuver. And we had a few different ways of doing this. One person would get off, the other person would pass up the bags to them. But it's pretty wobbly. You're on a board that's just under 11 foot long. And it's just full of air. You've got a big heavy bag of luggage which you're trying to maneuver around. And we'd had a couple of near misses on days 1 and 2, where maybe you'd turned to put the bag on the side of the bank and found that a little gap had appeared between your board and the bank. And they're pretty stable boards, they're quite wide, so we'd always just kind of thrown ourselves back down flat onto the board, and it had been okay. I think you can probably guess what's coming, and it was no longer okay. So Jo had reached up to put a bag on the side, and in doing that, her board had moved away from the bank, and she kind of tumbled into the gap between bank and board just by lock. Luckily, it was not a busy lock, and there was nobody to see it. And she did a really good job to keep her face out the dirty canal. It was pretty grim, and climb out. The downside was that obviously we didn't have many sets of clothes. You can tell by the size of the bag. We packed pretty light. So she did kind of have to change into her only sort of dryish clothes at that point. And I have to say, at that point, the weather took a little turn for the worse. So Jo didn't have a full set of kit because she'd fallen into the water in some of her waterproof clothes. And then it started to really, really rain. So we were super, super pleased when we got to this breakfast. But that wasn't the only reason we were really excited. So between the junction and the cafe there, this is at Beeston Marina, there's a stretch of nature reserve. So there's a couple of fun things on the way. One is there's an island that's owned by the Scouts, so we did stop off and have a little look at that. And the other thing is that in the nature reserve there are now otters, and we know that only because we were really lucky to see some otters. And I just in the distance had seen some ripples on the water that didn't look like a bird or fish. And it kind of popped into my head, what if it's otters? And I thought, no, it won't be otters. We're just outside Nottingham. How would there be otters here? Why would there be otters here? And then the ripples kind of got closer and closer, and there were 3 otters just kind of playing the water, coming straight past us. And it was one of the best things I've ever seen. So I'm not only smiling in the photo there because I've got a massive breakfast. We've been out in the tipping rain for hours at the point we're eating this. I'm smiling because I was excited for pretty much the whole of the rest of that day, which was handy because it did look a little bit like this for most of it. There's the city ground just outside Nottingham. So it was just one of the most amazing experiences. And I spent a lot of time when we cycled around Scandinavia looking for otters and not seeing them. So to see them just, as the crow flies, less than 30 miles from where I was living, was just one of the best things that's happened, I think, on any of our trips. Hi again. I hope you all had a great break. No tea here, just trying to look after my voice for the second half. So I'll have mine afterwards. So we left ourselves somewhere sort of in the Midlands. We were near Nottingham. Hopefully, I'll just bring the photo up nice and big screen for everyone. And we've got this not very nice weather just outside Trent Bridge. And this is where our adventure is not quite as glamorous as it first seemed. So earlier there was a cooked breakfast, there was otters, it's all going very well. And later on that day, luckily we've got the memory of the otters because the weather was pretty grim. And actually, if you think about, if you know the area, the Victoria Embankment down there in West Bridgford, the water was sloshing against those concrete steps and coming back out to hit us again a second time. So it was pretty rough and wild, but luckily we were feeling much more confident on the sups by then. So you can see we're still standing up and the water's a bit gentler. And the next day was much nicer weather to be out. So we're heading kind of east now from Nottingham through the area. There's Gunthorpe, those nice villages along there. Really pretty scenery and really felt quite wild. And you might be thinking, oh, Debs, you haven't got very much stuff in these bags. Where are you actually going to be sleeping? Well, the great thing about a river trip is you're kind of instantly somewhere that is pretty safe to be, because you can often only really access some of the places you can get to by the river. So most of the time when we are on sup trips, we tend to just find somewhere safe and sensible to sleep in a field at the side of the river. So it looks something a little bit like this area. So it's not super glamorous, but definitely we're not in the way of any kind of farming or anything like that. You can only really get to us if you hike across all the fields or you come up from the riverbanks. We're right by the riverbank here, so it's pretty safe. So we'll be paddling along, you see the lights getting low there, and we'll just be checking out where on the sides of the river you might sleep. So this kind of wild camping.
Sorry, just a quick question. Are you presenting your photos? We've got the File Explorer view.
Oh, sorry. I'm really sorry. Okay, hold on one moment. Let me just try that one again. Okay. How about now?
Yeah, presentation mode, that's perfect.
Really sorry about that, team. So you just had a few photos of the Trent there. So often where we'll sleep, we'll show you a picture of it now, like this. So it's the edge of a farmer's field. We're not in the way of any crops or any farming that's going to go on. We've chosen the kind of not so nice bit right at the edge. And this kind of camping, people often say, oh, wild camping, isn't strictly speaking legal in the UK. If you were on a footpath, you could rest but not put up a tent. So a bivvy, like you can see there, so that's just a kind of big waterproof sack that goes over your sleeping bag. A bivvy is just fine on a footpath, putting up a tent isn't. But this kind of thing is really just, I think the general balance is to be somewhere where you are unobtrusive, so you're not in sight of any houses or anything like that. You're not going to be in anyone's way, and you yourself are going to feel safe. And actually, when you're looking for somewhere to bivvy by the river, the general thing that makes you feel uncomfortable is the fact that if you can see lots of hoof prints, you don't want to get trodden on by cows. Actually, there's not really much chance that people are going to get anywhere near you. And you can actually see that probably the worst that's going to happen is the farmer and his mate are going to arrive and say good morning a bit before you get up. And then the tractor's going to arrive while you're cooking breakfast, and they'll say hello as well and hope you had a nice sleep. And we've never really been in a position where our chosen place of sleeping has caused anybody any problems or anybody's told us to move or anything like that. So I think as long as you are sensible with these things and respectful of your surroundings, and there's just our leave no trace photo, we really have left absolutely no trace at all. So really important that you're respectful, but also look at opportunities to enable an adventure you might not otherwise be able to have. There's no campsites on this route, so there would be no way of camping without being confident to do this. So that was our sleep spot for the last night of the trip, actually. And the only downside of the sleep spot was it was a little bit tricky to get back down to the bank with all the stuff. So some difficult maneuvering there with the board. And I think I said it's quite heavy. It's not really heavy. You can't move it with the bag on it because the weight's too uneven, but it is a little bit unwieldy at times to maneuver it around. And we did eventually get ourselves off down the river towards Newark, and get ourselves to a pub for a cooked breakfast, which is never a bad way to start the day. So all going pretty well, and we're really pleased with this because it's our first sub trip. We've gone from Leicester to Newark. It's about 75 miles. So it's a reasonable distance. We've avoided all the dangerous things along the way. We've seen some wonderful sights and some that are maybe not quite so wonderful. And we have really felt like this is a really big achievement. I feel like this was a big achievement of some much longer trips we've done, because it was just so different and really kind of physically challenging and logistically slightly different to a lot of things we've done before. And I think I said before, those locks and the portages were really tiring. So even after kind of 4.5 days of doing them really regularly, here I am just rolling around on the bank to pull the board out. It's the easiest way to do it. So I'm not going to say it looks slick or glamorous or exciting all of the time, but it was really, really a great way to travel, and one of the trips that I think that I'm most proud that we've done. So we have actually done a couple of other river trips since then, and we've gone from Cambridge to Ely, which is just a short kind of overnight in Wicken Fen, which is really a beautiful nature reserve. And we've also gone from Bedford to Ely along the Great Ouse, and that was the last bank holiday in the summer, which was beautiful, beautiful weather, and lots of fun doing that. We've picked all of those sub trips really just for ease of logistics. So the rivers have all been totally beautiful, but it's been really easy for us to get to them because we've just either gone near our house to make a start or been able to get to the start or from the start on the train. So once we've packed up the bags, you see we're at Newark Castle. We're just a short walk over the park to the Newark station, and it's dead easy just to get ourselves on the train. The stuff doesn't even take up that much space on the train, and we could just walk home afterwards from the station. So really lots of easy logistics that make those trips possible. It doesn't have to be going to a river out in the wilds of everywhere. I felt like they were really kind of important adventures, important trips, really close to home. So that's been a really great feature of the sub trips, the fact that it feels quite intrepid without actually being that intrepid. I'm not really sure anybody ever before got the rail replacement bus to Bedford to start an intrepid adventure, but that's exactly what we did in August 2019, and it was really, really great. So totally love the sub trips, a really new way to adventure. Our longest one so far has been about 4.5 days, so 4 nights out. The sleeping outside's a really nice part of it. And because you're often away from towns and things, sleeping outside, last year in particular, when we were out in the kind of flatter areas around Cambridgeshire, we saw amazing amounts of stars because we were so far away from any other lights. So it's just been a really great, different way to see places that are local. And there's no kind of difficult logistics at the end of it. There's no, oh, we've left our car at one end and now we're at the other end and we've got to go back and then it's a 3.5-hour drive. It's just been really, really easy logistics. And I think that's a theme that really kind of appeals to me, is making that journey quite easy. And I'm just going to come back to the screen now while I get ready for some other and I've just seen one of the questions, sorry. What do you do for lose? Okay, well, that's a great question, Claire. Thanks for it. That is the very common question when I visit primary schools, actually, is where do you go to the toilet? For number ones, wherever is sensible, practical, and hopefully discreet. For number twos, I'm afraid sometimes we're not really shovel carriers, we're not really into that, or poo tube carriers. So it's just a wait till you get to the next toilet. So luckily they're quite regular, and it has never been a huge problem in life. So it's a great question, very valid, and one that isn't usually so much of a problem as you might think. So it's pretty straightforward. You often go past marinas when you're on the river, that kind of thing. So I said logistics being easy really appeals to me. I don't want the buzzkill of doing this big trip and then having to work out how I get back. So that's often the real driver in how we pick UK trips, especially for shorter holidays. So that one was just a 4-day bank holiday weekend, a 5-day bank holiday weekend trip. Last Easter, we did a hiking trip, which I'll show you in just a moment. But I'll just tell you a little bit about how our hiking started. I did Duke of Edinburgh at school, so I did bronze and silver Duke of Edinburgh and went off with my friends to Derbyshire. We walked, it rained a lot. I'm still friends with some of the people that I did Duke of Edinburgh with. It was a lot of fun. One of my friend's trousers split when she climbed over a dry stone wall. That was the total highlight of the few days. And I really enjoyed myself. And Jo didn't have that chance. She didn't. Duke of Edinburgh wasn't a thing at her school, so she'd never really done any overnight hiking. So we were in New Zealand in 2016, 17, so that kind of Christmas New Year period, and we were after a break from the bikes, so we thought we would walk the Hillary Trail, which is near Auckland and is currently closed, I think, because of the cowrie dieback disease. But is a really beautiful trail. It's about 70 something kilometers maybe, so 50 odd miles over 4 days. And thanks to Val and Peter, who are here today, because they helped out with the logistics of that one, of getting us to the start and the end. And that was our first kind of overnight hiking trip as adults. So we had all of our biking kit, and we just borrowed one of Val's rucksacks and put our bike kit in a hiking bag, and off we went. And it went quite well. We thought it had gone all right, and we were lucky that because we've been doing all the cycling, we didn't have too sore legs the next day. So that was really good. It was all going quite well. Beautiful scenery, great weather until the last day. And so we thought, okay, maybe when we get back home, we'll do a hiking trip. So in Easter 2018, we walked the Ridgeway, which is the UK's oldest street. It goes from sort of Salisbury-ish up towards Ivanhoe Beacon near Tring. And we actually extended it a little bit because we were feeling a bit ambitious, and that turned out to be a little bit too far per day, but we still had a good time. And we thought, okay, well, that was good, and it wasn't too hilly, so we have got a bit better about walking, so maybe we could try something a bit more ambitious. So I started Googling, or not Googling, National Rail inquiries-ing where I could get a cheap train ticket to in Easter and where might be good to visit. And I came up with the idea that we would do a different walk to one of the national trails. So the first walk we did, the Ridgeway, that's a national trail. I came up with the idea that we would do something different, purely based on the fact, really, that I wanted to do the Settle to Carlisle train journey, or Carlisle to Settle, wasn't really fussed about which way. So you can see we've got one of these pack-up pictures again. It's pretty much the same as a bike trip or a sup trip. Got the small stove, not the big stove. It's different to a bike trip. Got a load of maps. One of our friends gave us some dehydrated food there, so that saved some packing space. And got all packed up. We like to have one big bag and one small bag. It's a 20-minute or half an hour thing. So you do the big bag for a while, then you get the small bag. So by packing light, you get a bit more rest time, because as soon as you get the small bag, you really feel like it's just a total break. So if you can deal with the discomfort of having less stuff, less snacks, less clothes, or that kind of thing, then you can have a bit of a lighter load on your shoulders. So here we are, we've got to Settle, and you think, oh, Settle to Carlisle, it's a train journey, so you must be able to do a nicely graded walk that doesn't go up and down hill too much. And you can pretty much walk similar to the route of the train, but through a few more of the villages. Beautiful scenery. However, we decided that we'd like something a little bit more challenging than that. So we're actually walking Settle to Carlisle via all of the hills that there are possibly along the way. So the Dales, the Howgills, which I'd never even heard of, didn't even know there was a range of hills there, and then through the Lake District. So it promised to be a really, really beautiful walk, but a very, very challenging one. Much longer than the Hillary Trail and much hillier than the Ridgeway. So this was, again, a bit of a step up for us. And it was also a bit of a challenge because the night before starting, we'd been at a friend's wedding. And so we didn't actually get up to Settle until about 3 or 4 o'clock. I think there was a couple of train delays as well. So we decided to put in some early miles on that first night and got ourselves to within kind of touching distance of Ingleborough, and had a little camp out. We made some friends along the way. You can see these guys. I'm going to skip past the video. You might have seen that a moment ago, just because it comes out ever so jerky on here. But it was really, really windy the first full day. So we did go over Ingleborough. There wasn't really a way to avoid that. But when it came to Whernside, so one of the other Yorkshire Three Peaks, we actually kind of went around the top rather than over it, because it was actually quite dangerously windy. But the scenery was absolutely beautiful, and you can see here now, day 2 of the walk, I think we've made it to day 3, just north of Sedbergh in the Howgills. So it was just lovely walking through the Dales. We had 2 of the 3 peaks, into Dens, which is a charming little village, and then north to Sedbergh and the Howgills, which were stunning. It's a little bit overcast. We're having a nice time, and it's all going pretty well. Now, very often on these talks, and I will talk a bit more about this later, you see all these great photos of wonderful weather. You know, if I'd picked the other trip to tell you about, it wouldn't have been so good because a lot of people are from Leicester, but also it was just wall-to-wall sunshine all the time. What actually happens a lot of the time on trips is that it can look a bit grey, and also you end up kind of doing things that you wouldn't normally do. So it looks like I'm enjoying cooking and eating a dinner here just in the edge of what is the campsite shower, because it was absolutely freezing, and I'm not really sure the photo's giving justice to the kind of like mizzle that was going on that evening. So this is kind of somewhere a bit north of Sedbergh and the Howe Gills, and just before we kind of turn west to the lakes. The best thing about this campsite though was we only kind of went there by accident, but on the way to it there was this tiny school building just at the side of the road in the village, and there was all kind of you know, local people had put stories about the school being in use and what else the building had been used for, and it was just unlocked at the side. You could just go in, have a little look, and learn about the village. And I think sometimes you on trips you can miss things like that so easily, and every time I find them I'm always so pleased to have done so, that I really enjoy learning about the smaller places that we're going through. So it's all going pretty well, but like a lot of walks and a bit like the river trips, you can be a bit of a gap between supplies, and this happened, you know, the Ridgeway is through quite a populated area of the UK. Really, we could see Swindon for quite a long time and some other, you know, bigger towns there, but actually the footpath itself went nowhere near any shops. So you do sometimes get to a point where you're a bit hungry and you're really excited to get to a village, and you know, little treats are very, very important. So we were really pleased that despite the diversion, we made it to a village called Shap, where there was both a chip shop and a cafe. So this was a big calorie kind of build up for us. We were excited to get there, and very much made the most of what the local shops had to offer, and obviously, you know, stashed up our bag full of food for the next couple of days. And from Shap, we really got out into the lakes. So beautiful abbey. It's a great place to visit, Shap. Great chips, great cafe, great abbey. So would really recommend that one as a little detour off the M6 should you be going somewhere. And from there, you're very much kind of then going into more of the Lake Districts and into the national park. So really beautiful walking, starting to get some of that really stunning scenery with the big hills and the lakes that we expect. And as you can see, I also entered the land of the giants there on that evening, going along by one of the lakes. And we did find some beautiful places to sensibly sleep out, and also some beautiful breakfast places. So I'm enjoying my my Easter hot cross buns there. So this is just before Easter last year. So wonderful to enjoy your meals in nice places. And that's one of my favourite things always about bike trips, walk trips, paddling trips, whatever it is that you're just, your normal sandwiches are suddenly you in this wonderful place just enjoying your little pack up. So, and I think you can get very, very excited about any food on offer, like that egg custard. I mean, I can still remember that now. So it's definitely makes eating more fun and more memorable to be out of doors. So wonderful scenery. Did have a bit of a scramble on this day going up to High Street, if we've got any Lake District familiars in the audience. And this was a bit of a struggle actually, because we'd obviously stashed up on food in Shap the day before, but we didn't have that much breakfast stuff or lunch stuff. So we had a couple of hot cross buns and probably a few bananas, but we were starting to get a little bit hungry by the time we eventually got up to the top here, and enjoyed following the pink sheep down to Pastel and Glenridding, where we could stash up on food before going out to the YHA at Helvellyn. Now, I love a YHA hostel. It's my aim to visit them all. Hopefully I'll do it sometime. And they're a really big part of our adventures, because that just feels like a treat. And I'll talk a little bit later about comfort levels as well. But when you've been out camping and walking all day, to get in somewhere away from the wind where you can cook your meal not hunched over a stove just feels like a total treat. So you can see I've got, you know, sausages, broccoli, spaghetti, just loads and loads of calories all in one bowl there. And we're pretty excited about that, and the size of the porridge bowl the next morning as well. So it's always a good little recharge point to have booked ahead, and we plan that one ahead, that kind of rest night almost. didn't have a day off, but it still really recharged how we felt about the trip. So that was a really great one. Beautiful scenery carrying on north from there, from Whitechey, Helvellyn. We didn't go over Helvellyn, it wasn't quite on our route, but we did go up and over Blencathra. Really lots of fun, great scenery. Started to see a few more people out, because I think this was maybe Easter Saturday actually, going up over Blencathra. Wonderful scenery to the north of there as well. But again, we've kind of been in this position where just cooling off in the river, in this position where we're starting to run out of food. We're not carrying loads and loads of food, and we haven't got an evening meal. Actually, we're all right for snacks and stuff, but we haven't got an evening meal. But it's okay, because we know there's a village, and we arrive in this village pub and it is rammed. Oh my goodness, every single person who lives in this village is in the pub. And we suddenly started to worry, what if they're not going to feed us? I mean, you can see, luckily, they took pity on us, squeezed us in the bar and said, look, the only thing we can do is scampi and chips. Is that all right? And we said, of course it is. Just any food is great food. So we enjoyed a great scampi and chips. But the reason the pub was full is because it is Easter Saturday, Egg Conkers night in Heskett Newmarket. So Heskett Newmarket is quite a unique place because it's a community-owned pub. It was the UK's first community-owned pub. And I've no idea whether the Egg Conkers relates to that. I suspect it's an older tradition, but there was a lady from the village who had pickled a lot of eggs. So she had this big kind of bucket, barrel, I don't know, whatever, of pickled eggs. And you paid your 50p and got an egg and a ticket number with it. And then it was a draw, a bit like the FA Cup, you know, so egg 454 plays egg 231 or whatever it was. And the rules are this. So you can have a go at home, and people have got a lot of time on their hands at the moment. Pickle your eggs, and then if you're drawn first, you get to choose whether you hold or strike. So if you're the holder, you can hold your egg either way up, but you can only cover up about half of it with your hand. If you're the striker, you hit the other person's egg, and the loser is the person whose egg cracks first. If your egg remains intact, you go through to the next round. Now, I've got to say, we were in the pub a long time that evening, and we did not get anywhere near the final. There were a lot of rounds of this, and the tension was building. There was a lady near us, her and her husband, who were just visiting as well for the weekend, and she got through more rounds than we did. So maybe she'd have well eventually. But it was very, very exciting to see everybody already kind of engaged in this yearly event, and a lot of fun. And you know, you could try it at home, definitely. And bonus was you got to eat your egg after it cracked, so a bit of extra protein for the hikers. We were pleased with that one. So great place to visit, really enjoyed it, and we were excited because this meant we were only 14 or 15 miles away from the end point in Carlisle. So we'd made really good time. And actually we'd anticipated that during the Saturday, and this is kind of what I'm talking about with comfort and excitement. We were heading for Carlisle that morning after a beautiful camp out in some Bluebell Woods, heading for Carlisle, following the river all the way. It was nice, easy walking. We thought we'd get into town pretty early, and I don't think there's many times people will be as excited as we were that day to arrive at a city centre travel lodge. So we were really, really excited this morning. There were lots of great stuff on the way. There was a church where there were refreshments for hikers on the Cumbria Way. Lots of just lovely rural scenery, a bit like if you went out walking around us really, or around Leicestershire. And we eventually got through all the challenging infrastructure for a big bag and got ourselves to Carlisle. And the kind of sense of satisfaction of arriving at that travel lodge about probably 2 or 3 o'clock that Easter Sunday afternoon, loads of people out on the streets of Carlisle drinking, having a good time because it's Easter Sunday, bank holiday the next day, beautiful sunshine, was immense. And I think, you know, if you said in advance, by the way, you're going to have your Easter Sunday night in a travel lodge in Carlisle, it doesn't sound that exciting, but it was brilliant getting there. We were so pleased. We were kind of we thought we might not get there till the Monday, so we were slightly ahead of schedule. Meant we could go out and choose somewhere to eat, we could wash, you know, we could put some clean clothes on, or clean-ish clothes on, the cleanest ones we had. And I think that's a really, really kind of important part of doing trips like this, is appreciating kind of small luxuries. And I think that's one thing that's really helping right now, because life at the moment has become quite narrow, hasn't it? The things that are in your house and the things that you can do in your house or in your garden if you've got one, and things you can do within your little bit of exercise time outside your house. And appreciating those things you can do is going to be really important for everyone. So, you know, it's okay to get excited when you bake something new, and it's okay to get excited when you decide to have homemade chips tonight, or it's okay to be excited because you're going to watch a film you've thought about watching for a while and you never have, or you're going to reread your favourite book. I think those small luxuries are even more important than normal at the moment, and I think being on trips really makes you think lots about those. So Settles Carlisle, it was quite a long walk, that one. It was about 120 miles, I think, 128 miles. So definitely feel like a bona fide hiker now as well. So I'm just going to go back to another presentation and talk about something that I've mentioned a couple of times. What's this? Mary Berry featured egg conkers in her Easter programme. Did she? What was the secret technique for egg conkers? No idea. I lost in the first round, so I've got no secret technique. And what if both eggs cracked? If both eggs cracked, I assume it would be the person who's cracked the least, but I don't think it happened. We certainly didn't see it happen, and we did see a lot of battles. So let's just go back to this this presentation for a moment, and I'll show you something that is quite kind of important to me, I suppose, in terms of thinking about adventures and what you think it's going to be like and what it's actually going to be like. So here we are. I don't think that's worked. We didn't go on the steam train, sorry, no, just the normal train back to Settle, and then the normal train all the way back to Stamford. Okay, so I'm hoping you're going to get the slideshow and not the screen. So when you plan an adventure, especially if you plan a really long one, this is what you think is going to happen. You're going to think that I'm going to get really healthy, I'm going to be really athletic, I'm going to be suddenly this kind of super person. Obviously, you're going to have an amazing suntan. Even if you're in the UK, maybe that can happen, but not usually. Everything will look like Instagram, so all the photos are going to be amazing. I've tried to include some of the drizzly ones on this one. It's hard because you tend not to take that many photos when it's raining, but it's not always sunny, it's not always beautiful. Sometimes you go past the factories that you saw, you go past the power stations that you saw, and people will think that you are a total hero. What actually happens is a bit more like this. You are very good at a very niche area of fitness. So carrying a bag and walking quite slowly, paddling quite a heavy paddle board, not really that useful. You don't often have, amazing weather. We've been fortunate a couple of times. The UK one's actually, the second half of that Settled Carlisle walk was amazing. It was really hot, really sunny. It's not always beautiful scenery. A lot of the time it is, if you pick well. A lot of the time it's great scenery, and just our rural scenery in the UK is amazing. I think it's a really nice place just to cycle around, even just on your local roads where you live. And people mainly think you're a bit odd that you choose to do these kind of trips in your holiday time. That is what happens. And I think if you're going to plan a trip for yourself that is a journey where you go from place to place, the biggest and most important decision you'll make is how uncomfortable can you deal with being. So we're okay with not booking in advance. We can sleep somewhere by the side of the river. That's totally fine for us. We know we'll have a nice time. If you don't think you'll have a nice time doing that, then it's really not worth it. Just book something where you can stay in a different hotel or a different youth hostel and move from place to place that way. If you think, actually, I wouldn't enjoy walking all day, I'd much rather just walk till lunchtime and then have some time to read my book and go to a cafe. No problem. Just plan your gaps so they're much closer together. You don't have to walk so far. And I think understanding that level of kind of discomfort that you can deal with is how to have really enjoyable adventures. And I think considering your own travel to them is really important, and something that I hear people say a lot. I take my bike on the train a lot, and so people always talk to you when you're on the train with your bike. And the most common trip that cyclists tell me they're going to do as a first cycle tour is the UK coast to coast, or the England coast to coast, which is from somewhere in the lakes to somewhere in Northumbria, or near Newcastle. And I always think when people say that, I think that sounds like a great trip. I'm sure it's beautiful scenery. I've ridden part of the route on some of the trips. But how are you going to get there? How are you going to get to the start and how are you going to get to the end? And you're going to get to the end and you're triumphant. You've done it in 2-3 days, whatever your target was, and your car's back over in the Lake District. You somehow got to get back over. Or on that Friday night when you're tired from work, but you've got to go start your adventure. You've got to drive your car to Newcastle and somehow get over to the Lake District. Just seems like a total buzzkill to me. So a lot of these trips are really, what they're in common is they're really easy to do. I can just go to the station near my house, I can get on the train and I can come back on the train. I can have a little sleep on the train if I want to. And the SUP trip was even easier. I really can just go straight from my front door to the river. So try and have a think about what you want to achieve and what you think it's going to be like, and also how easy you can make it to have a good time. So thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to you all for taking your time out of your Friday lockdown and having a scheduled cup of tea rather than just one when you fancy it. Let's go for some questions now. So I'll stop the share.
Actually, Debs, there was one question just back at about 11:20, and it was a comment from Eleanor and Frank, and they said, "Did you see the Leicester Trader Museum barge at Newark? Really interesting history working life there."
We didn't, so maybe we'll just have to sup again. I would definitely do that trip again just to look for otters. I really would. I just loved seeing them so much. I would definitely do that section again. So from Trent Junction up to Newark. So yeah, we missed the steam train, so that was a good question. We just had booked one of the others, but it was still a beautiful journey and a great thing about that journey actually. And I think Joe's mum's here today, so hi Gillian if you are. Was that Joe's family came to meet us in Carlisle on the Monday afternoon just for a bit of a trip out. So we all went to sort of around Carlisle Cathedral and then back to settle together. And on the train on the way back, Joe's nephew, who's I think he was 9 at the time, said, "Oh, I'd really like to climb one of those hills about the Yorkshire Three Peaks." And so then a few weeks later, we went up there and took him up Penny Ghent. So that was a really great kind of moment for him to sort of see the scenery from the train and think, "Oh yeah, I'd like to be outside in that." So we were really pleased with that one.
A nice comment from Sarah as well, saying, "Have you thought about doing paid assisted trips where you can take small groups of people who would love to do a quick trip, walking and cycling travels, but would like a guide for the first few?"
Yeah, I would imagine that type of, if you were to actually do that paid, it would probably be quite heavily regulated. So it's not something I've looked into. Also, I'm a teacher. I love being a teacher. So lots of people who aren't teachers like to go on holiday, not in their school holiday times, because it's quieter and less expensive. So it's not something I've considered at the moment, but certainly I think maybe at some point in the future, I would consider doing something like that. I think for the SUP trips, we found it really hard to find information about long distance paddling trips. So we often would find maybe an overnight trip or a day trip along rivers. It was not easy to find information about doing a long trip along any UK rivers really that we found. So we really were just kind of winging those ones. So if you know anyone who'd like to do a SUP trip and needs some help, then we've got a few rivers covered now. So the Ouse in Yorkshire and the Great Ouse in Bedfordshire and Thames and the Soar and the Trent. So that was really kind of no information available. So, have we got any other questions? So just feel free to go for it in the textbooks. SUP, stand up paddleboard. So SUP, stand up paddleboard. So that was the question. Why is it called a SUP, stand up paddleboard? Though you could just kneel down if you didn't fancy for being a bit wobbly. It's really good fun. I would recommend having a go. Definitely with the tip that the faster you go, the easier it is to stand up.